Yes, so hello everyone, and welcome to this store webinar. This store webinar will be part of our webinar series on the BaM content chain. Regarding the agenda of today's store webinar, firstly, I will shortly discuss some major trends and drivers of change in the store segment based on the results of IABM's research. After that, we will have a panel with Marquis Broadcast as well as object metrics. So when looking at the major drivers of change in store, naturally transition to cloud has been one of the major issues for this segment. We are expecting cloud growth to continue also during 2019 as media technology users continue to streamline their operations and also adopt multi-platform offerings. Secondly, by deploying cloud-based services, media companies can naturally dramatically reduce time to market for their services and also become more flexible to adjust resources by moving to consumption-based pricing. It is interesting that so far media companies have had apparently a preference more for hybrid and private cloud solutions, while then adoption of public cloud has been relatively limited. And also, and only we have seen some specific applications regarding public cloud. The second major driver of change for store segment is naturally transition to 4K and UHD, meaning ultra high definition. So far, ultra high definition adoption has been slower than expected among broadcasters, specifically because of the high deployment costs and also certain reluctance or uncertainty about consumer adoption. However, in 2018, we saw several major sporting events like the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, as well as the FIFA World Cup, which naturally pushed broadcasters and incentivized broadcasters to launch UHD offerings last year. So we could really see these major sporting events as a milestone for UHD adoption in our industry. Finally, also the big new media players like Netflix and Amazon, they now accept content only which is shot in 4K or UHD format, and this then drives the demand for 4K production equipment forward. When looking at the key technology demand drivers in the store segment, based on our latest research, multi-platform content delivery, meaning OTT, social media, mobile, remains the key technology driver, demand driver, followed by then transition to IP and also virtualization like cloud microservices and so on. Next, we will start the panel, and I would be delighted to introduce Paul Glasgow. He's the Managing Director of Marquis Broadcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Rika.
When it comes to the drivers of change, which I already a little bit touched on the previous slides, from your perspective, what are the major drivers of change in store segment?
I think there are a number of things. As storage densities have increased, perversely, so have some of the risks associated with production. So particularly in the shared storage editing platforms, where a single instance may be a petabyte, and recovering from a disaster or providing business continuity around that has been a major market for us. So that is one key area. We've seen the adoption of 4K quite rapidly on the production side. And to your point, the distribution chain may not be in place yet, but actually it makes complete sense to produce commercially exploitable material in 4K, because that will go into libraries and it will be used in several years when 4K and UHD is more widely available.
Right.
And the other thing that we're seeing is distributed productions where storage may be used on more than one location, but for a common production. And they're the biggish drivers for us.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Now, when we look at the store market, it has been somewhat turbulent when prices continue to decrease, and also new vendors continue to emerge. So the competition is getting more intensive. How do you differentiate your company, Marquis Broadcast, in this kind of marketplace, which is seeing all the time new competitors emerging?
Well, the good news for us is we're totally storage agnostic, and we actively support new entrants coming to the market. We produce software which manages storage environments specifically for the media broadcasts and production workflows. It's the ultimate end game, for us, and I guess for the industry, would be storage which is doesn't cost anything, has infinite capacity, infinite bandwidth, and doesn't use any power. So we're never going to achieve that, but that's the kind of end game that may exist at some point in the future, probably 100 years away. I don't know. As the technology. So our position has been to adopt new entrants as they come on, the serious new entrants as they come onto the market, and we usually find out about those who from our customers, and very often they bring something special or differentiated. So if you look at all of the storage vendors, they usually have a special place, a niche market where they're good versus other people. So what we want is our customers to be able to choose whatever storage they like. We don't charge them for attaching to on-prem cloud object storage, in-cloud cloud storage, ultra-high performance NAS, or even a USB stick. So they'll want to do that around specific productions. They may only use one storage for one production and then shut it down.
Right. Yes, definitely. You already mentioned briefly 4K in production and also how UHD is affecting your business. Could you elaborate a little bit more in detail that how do you see the adoption of 4K, but also virtual reality, as well as then other immersive formats, HDR, how these technologies are going forward, and how is it impacting your business in the coming years?
Yeah, I think that for us, UHD HDR is pretty well here now, and that's part of the production chain. That's part of where we spend a lot of time, as we said before. Although the delivery chain may not be there, it's there certainly for the major OTT players. But the cost of managing HDR is still significant, particularly in productions where there are very high shooting ratios, for example, unscripted documentaries.
Yes.
So there are other ways of cleverly mitigating the cost of UHD production. And one example is something we call proxy relinking, where you actually perform the edit at a lower resolution than UHD, and when you finish that edit, which is probably HD, UHD, HDR, when you've completed the edit, you relink to the UHD rushes, which could be stored on a lower cost storage. And that's something that we've been able to do for a number of years, and it really reduces the cost of UHD production. And as example, we've just done exactly that for a big US network where they have avid nexus and interplay on the ground, and they have their high resolution 4K and high resolution material in the cloud, and we relink back to AWS, transcode material from the cloud, ingest that into interplay on the ground. When the edits complete editorially, they just relink, and it just brings back all the high resolution partials from the cloud, and that way it also mitigates the egress charges.
All right. Very, very interesting. You already mentioned OTT. So when we see that video on demand is growing, there has also been a move away from dead archives to online storage systems. Because they can be then accessed more easily for content usage. Is this generally more expensive? And if yes, how are you helping users to deal with the increased costs?
Yeah, I think it's interesting your use of dead archives and VOD. So in a way, VOD is different because the content that's stored in a library, it can be cloud object storage or something, is rights cleared and it's ready to view. So the natural behavior of that is I want to buy this piece of material or rent it and view it. So it's delivered straight away.
Yes.
There are other types of libraries. So, for example, transmission libraries, which may be for long-form programming for TV companies, or there could be a commercial library. So you may have an online presence which is serving content at proxy resolutions with heavily watermarked, and then there's some kind of commercial transaction around it, and then delivery of the higher resolution content. And then probably how you're phrasing the kind of dead archives is probably what I would describe as a heritage library, one that has content in it. Probably only 5% of it is commercially exploitable, but the rest of it is very important to to the culture of the country or nation or whatever. And they tend to be a bit slower. They may still have tapes and films on shelves, but very often they have an online selected material. And in fairness, the BBC have done a good job of that. So you can get on free and have a look at some really interesting archive material.
Yeah, definitely. Then if we move to the cloud, it's important for storage segment, naturally. We have seen adoption of cloud focusing on collaborative workflows, but the cost of moving content out and in of the cloud is limiting adoption. Is this going to diminish in the near future? And how do you see this cost issue of moving content as the adoption of cloud goes forward?
So I think a lot of the cloud service providers' pricing models are different. And you have the very, very large organizations whose pricing models are more around non-media type workflows. In which case, ingest and egress charges can be prohibitive. So, what I see is the major networks have sweetheart deals with the big cloud object storage providers, and probably prices that no one else will get in the market. But what I see now is it's wrong in a way to think of cloud object storage as a single unified type of pricing model and stuff like that. So there are companies who came on the market, particularly last year, who have no egress charges and no ingest charges. And that's kind of broken that model and made the migration, actually accelerated the migration to cloud. And as example, we did a project back end of last year for a well-known TV company in the US, which was for disaster recovery, to back up their Nexus systems to the cloud, such that if there was an earthquake, they could pick that project up in another one of their facilities
Mm-hmm.
across town. Guess what? They've had the big earthquake, and at least they've got a very clear strategy around how to use the cloud economically. And because they don't back everything up, they just back up their most important business critical stuff.
Right.
And then it is that gets recovered to another location and carry on the production.
It's interesting example. How about then when it comes to actual workflows in store? How is cloud changing them in practice?
Yeah, it's very interesting. We're seeing other examples where the traditional model would be a facility would hold all the content in their own facility and use all their own storage. Mm-hmm. What we're starting to see the beginning of is the production companies, as part of the kind of the integrity of the production, they provide the storage as cloud object storage, and the facility writes the work in progress to their cloud object storage. So when the production is completed, then there is no movement of files, because actually the production company already have it. So that's another quite useful little tricky.
Very interesting.
We're just starting to see the beginning of that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So how's the cloud changing store workflows? I could misquote Ernest Hemingway at this point, which is gradually and then suddenly. And that was, I think, the sun also rises in 1926. But I don't know of any major broadcaster who has decent network connectivity who is not using cloud object storage or cloud compute in some part of their business. So as certain workflows and operations make sense to spin out in cloud, why not just do it if it makes sense? So we're starting to see that. We're starting to see people who are not doing everything. It's a bit like eating an elephant. You don't want to do it all in one go. So just spin things out that make sense, and it'll be some business or workflow or productivity benefit that it's enabling.
Right. You mentioned object storage that you currently don't know any broadcaster who wouldn't be already using cloud and also object storage. Yeah. Is this what are the challenges preventing still some broadcasters kind of from not adopting object-based storage, or is it more also regionally oriented, that, for example, you're looking at Europe and the US, for example, are these let's say the most advanced regions when it comes to object-based storage?
Yeah, I think the adoption of using cloud has been much faster in the States. And it's the pickup is much quicker, and people's willingness to modify what they do for commercial operational benefits works much faster there. In Europe, it's slower, but we're still seeing the players coming over and setting up regional storage, regional cloud object storage in Europe, and there's a number of players that have done that. So the issues of security and data integrity and not sharing data with foreign powers and stuff like that has generally gone away. Right. And so once those things are chipped away, then it becomes easier to deploy.
Interesting. How are you helping your customers at the moment when it comes to object-based storage and those challenges that they're facing? Do you have some examples which you would like to share?
Yeah, so we have been building against cloud object storage and cloud compute for the last 3 years. All our products that use storage natively integrate to cloud object storage, and all the different iterations of it. As an example, we launched a product at NAB called Postflux.
Oh.
And what that is able to do is to attach to all sorts of different flavors of storage, but also cloud object storage, and do clever things like version projects in cloud object storage. And where that might be useful, for example, is where a number of people are working on the same, in this case, Premiere Pro project, and they have contributors from all over the place, and they want to be able to pick up the project, edit it, put it back, or it's already there, they just send the changes back. But then that keeps the whole genealogy and the history of the project as it's been created, and it does so securely, so that's quite useful.
Interesting. So you mentioned conversion. Did I understand correctly that you mentioned conversion projects?
I'm not sure I said conversion. It is versioning projects.
Versioning. Oh, sorry. Yeah, versioning. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because actually, I was planning to ask later still about conversion when about conversion from HD to UHD and so on. Very interesting. No, then when looking at certain emerging technologies, naturally AI is an interesting technology for storage segment. Do you see that AI is taking it's increasingly adopted, and are there some applications or examples that you could describe or share?
Yeah, so we use analytics to we're not just moving files from one form of storage to another. What we do is we use analytics to understand the essence of those files.
Right.
So, what media do they have? What's the relationships with the project folders and the audio files and all that kind of stuff, which allows us to do some very clever things downstream of the storage. So that's one sort of application. Another part of our business is in terms of migrating media, often from legacy archives, which may have proprietary codecs, they may have unusual metadata wrappers and stuff like that. And we did a project in India as example where we migrated 200,000 assets from one server technology to another. And what that does is it gives you the possibility to be able to plug in analytics tools. We didn't do it for that project, but how we see this is in a migration process, that's the first time that the assets may come back at full resolution with all the metadata and the possibility to enrich the metadata during that process. So that could be audio analytics and video analytics and other stuff.
Very interesting. And how about, do you see some challenges related to AI among your customer base, or also some other stakeholders in the store segment?
Yeah, it's tricky because AI, it isn't necessarily a silver bullet. Some implementations of AI can be 80% right, but that's still
right.
20% isn't right.
Yeah.
So the trouble is knowing what's the 80% and what's the 20%.
Right.
So I think you probably see constrained use of AI. As machine learning comes in, then yes, it will become cleverer. But it's not, from what I've seen, I don't think it's 100% there yet, and it's a journey. It's like everything else.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Now then, if looking ahead and the horizon of store technology vendors business, what are you anticipating to come next in storage, content storage technology, and also workflows, and how is your company preparing for the future?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is more cloud ground hybridness. So there are people who are on one extreme, which is all their infrastructure is firmly bolted to the ground.
Mhm,
There are others who may be new entrants and have a greenfield, and they can put a lot of what they're doing in the cloud.
mhm,
And then between the two lies an environment where you have to make this stuff work together.
mhm,
And so we see a lot of hybrid workflows where part of the production will be on the ground, part of it
mhm,
will be in the cloud. And so we want to enable those sorts of environments. So we have a product called Medway Engine Web Service, which is
mhm,
a service which runs in cloud compute, but it can also
mhm,
manage cloud storage and rewrap, transcode, translate from HD to UHD,
mhm,
deinterlace, all those sorts of things that you may wish to do in that kind of environment. And then there's something I mentioned earlier on, something called Postflux, which basically has all of the storage, our entire storage library, our library of storage connectors
mhm,
built in from the get-go. So from day one, it it supports most of the major cloud storage providers from the get-go, and that
mhm,
means it can do all sorts of very useful things in a hybrid way as a kind of a microservices type product.
mhm,
And I see that certainly being the future, which is production workflows moving into the
mhm,
cloud, and then somewhat integrated with the ground, and we just have to play in that space. And so
mhm,
that's the key thing for us.
mhm. Very interesting. Um, I have few additional questions. As so far, we still have enough time.
Okay.
So I would have a question regarding 5G. Um, we are seeing increasingly 5G related initiatives also in the broadcast field, and particularly in Asia and, for example, in China, the telecom, like telcos, meaning telecom operators, they are entering to the content distribution space with 5G. And this year already with some initial trials. How do you see 5G to possibly affect store segment in the future, and or will it have any effect?
It will, and the telco industry in comparison with the broadcast industry is huge.
Right.
It's hundreds of thousand times larger than the broadcast and post
Mm-hmm.
movie production business. So their back end infrastructure is also enormous.
Mm-hmm.
So we see lots of user generated content, which is just the rubbish that people create with their iPhones and send it
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
their relatives. But
Mm-hmm.
there is also the interest in streaming content and high resolution, high quality material. And again, that will need all of the back end infrastructure to be able to support that kind of
Mm-hmm.
process and production workflows. So overall for the storage industry, it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's always it's going to be a fight in the same way as 3G was, and
Mm-hmm.
4G and 5G and 7G or whatever that will be.
Right.
But we sort of get to the point where bandwidth is ubiquitous. So you can almost do anything anywhere. You can create material, you can shoot content, you can post produce it, you can deliver it. And so 5G enables a lot of that kind of workflow and process. But it's going to take several years for it to roll out, and I'm sure there'll be the next G coming after the 5G. So we'll see where all that gets us.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. And do you see that 5G, for example, for you is your company somehow preparing for it already, or are you kind of keeping eye on it and monitoring what happens?
Well, I think we like to understand the environment, but it's not really our core business.
Mm-hmm. Right.
but what we need to prepare for is what happens upstream of those, the downstream production. So I'm sure some of our partners will be heavily involved in it, and I can just see Jonathan's joined.
Yes, me too, actually.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Jonathan. We have actually already gone through majority of the questions with Paul, so we could possibly also have your view on some of the topics that we have already discussed. So Paul, if it's okay for you, I will now switch to Jonathan for some of the topics that we already discussed. Is that okay for you?
Oh yes, please, and thank you.
Yes, thank you. And also, of course, please feel free to comment if there's something that you would like to add when we discuss with Jonathan. So next, I would like to introduce and welcome Jonathan Morgan. He's the CEO of Object Metrics. Welcome, Jonathan, to this STOR panel.
Hello, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So we already discussed with Paul about major drivers of change in STOR. What are those major drivers currently transforming the market from your perspective in STOR?
Yeah, sure. I mean, within the media industry, certainly we've seen a couple of major things happening over the last few years. For years, we've seen a growth of storage and a growth of reuse of the storage. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really helped to make two major things happen. So one of them is that where some workflows previously belonged on LTO, they don't belong in there anymore. And one of the reasons for that is because people want to reuse that data.
Right.
So obviously there are some workflows that still go to LTO and are still entirely appropriate on that platform. But where people want to reuse the data, want to be able to repurpose the data, maybe analyze the data, bring new value out of the data, that doesn't belong on the LTO kind of side of things anymore. And the second area that we see a big change is obviously the cloud has become more and more popular with different workflows, being able to share data across different teams, and in some cases processing the data inside of the cloud. And for those workflows, that's also kind of been a big change. So for us, around the nearline storage, around the archive, around the way that people use our platform, there are new ways of both using our platform and new ways of integrating the platform in ways that exploit those pieces I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. We already discussed with Paul about also the competition in the marketplace, that there's increasingly new vendors emerging, and also naturally affecting prices in the STOR segment. How do you differentiate your company in the increasingly competed market?
Well, I mean, in some ways, there's always more competition. So I guess whenever you take any slice of history, you could say the same thing. Mm-hmm. We actually see people asking us nowadays for object storage, which for us is an amazing thing, because we were in the market, possibly 10 years too early in some ways. People didn't know what objects were. They would say, "What's an object?" That would be their first question. Now they know why they want object storage. They know they want to be able to transport the data easily, grow very large archives very easily, have future-proof platforms. So they know why they're talking to us. So that's good. I mean, we see that as a really healthy place for us to be. In terms of how they compete on price and how we compete, etc. We are media specialists, so we have been doing object storage in this industry. We believe we were the very first company to actually have a solution in the media space. And over the years, we've added integrations, we've added functionality that people really need. And we haven't been sidetracked by making a product that is a generalist product. We've been able to focus and and keep the company tight. Everybody in this company understands media workflows. We configure the product for large files, for the types of media that people store, and we integrate with the products that people need. So yes, of course, there's an argument around price, but really the argument should be around value. It should be across total economical benefits of the overall solution. And that's where we believe we entirely win out against any other product that's out there in our space.
Yes, it's very, very interesting. No, we also discussed already about 4K and UHD and also other immersive formats like VR. How do you see these immersive formats and immersive technologies to go forward, and how does this affect your business at the moment?
Well, in the basics, we love it. They use more storage, and we sell storage. So we really like it when people use 4K. In fact, we would say use 8K, etc., etc. Do we see our clients using those platforms? Very much so. We see them as a minimum doing 4K work these days and more. The storage that requires obviously makes new demands on the platforms in terms of performance, in terms of scale. And for us, we wouldn't be delivering the right product if we didn't address and meet those demands with the product that we deliver.
How is then, I was actually planning to ask this also from Paul, that we have encountered situations where some technology vendors or their end customers have mentioned that, particularly in Asia, that there's a niche for converting the content from HD content to UHD. Is this conversion something that you see as well as an interesting area, or are your customers also doing it at the moment?
I would say I haven't come across that overly often in that particular format. Certainly people need to transcode, and certainly what we do find is, again, going back to the LTO world, if all of your data is on LTO and you need to do that conversion, good luck to you. You know, you've got an awful lot of tape you've got to read in, do the conversions, maybe pull it back to another tape, etc., etc. Some conversions require more random access to the data, to the media file. So again, having a disk-based random access solution is an obvious benefit over a LTO type of a solution. So absolutely, we see people repurposing the data they've already got and delivering that, be that over the web, be that in 4K to UHD, etc. But yeah, I would be lying if I said I saw that particular example on a day-to-day basis.
Right. What about Paul? Have you encountered this kind of use cases of HD to UHD conversion?
Yeah, and it's we do it, and we do it on the ground or in the cloud. We also do something called motion compensated deinterlacing, where you may be going from 1080i to a progressive format. You know, it could be any progressive format up to UHD. But it's a different product. It's our either Medway Engine Web Service, Muse, or Medway. We do that kind of multi-resolution processing.
Okay.
And that can be really important where you are dealing with what we call edit sequences, where you may be not only transferring the high resolution production quality, but also low resolution proxies at the same time. And when I say low resolution proxies, they could also be HD. So we need to work in that space. And of course, Jonathan loves all the storage associated with that kind of thing.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to follow on from that, I mean, we really are the storage piece, the scalable storage piece. Yeah. We don't really care what the formats are. It's ones and zeros in a lot of ways to ourselves. And it's people like Marcus and Paul who would be at the front end of doing that kind of conversion. Yeah.
Okay. But then next, when it comes to video on demand, and naturally it's growing, we have seen a move from dead archives to online storage systems, so that the content can be more easily accessed. Is this, in your view, more expensive? And if yes, how do you deal with this issue and help your customers?
More expensive in comparison to?
When moving away from dead archives to online storage.
All right. Well, in those respects, certainly we would expect to see the benefits of online storage, being able to both quickly access the files that people need, of course, and also actually in video on demand, I think a lot of the metadata extraction, the ability to do AI types of operations on the archives in order to better analyze what's there, better present to the end user what's available to them in a more real-time kind of fashion. So maybe they want to do a search, maybe they want to find particular genres or do a semantic analysis of a video and be able to say search for a car chase scene or something like this. If you want to be able to do any of the more advanced, any of the more kind of high-end, if you like, functionality that's beginning to become available nowadays, you really need to have an archive that you can access quickly and be able to analyze through quickly. We've been working, for instance, with British Telecom doing video on demand for, wouldn't like to say exactly, maybe 10 years. And that's been on an online platform. They were really early to the market there. They saw the benefits of being able to have a large-scale online video archive for their video on demand services. And so it's not a new thing, but it's an area where there's new and better techniques available nowadays, which can take advantage of fast archive.
Right. Now then, when it comes to cloud and cloud adoption, it has focused on collaborative workflows. But then again, there's the issue related to cost when moving content in and out of the cloud. Do you see this still limiting the adoption? And how do you see is the cost factor diminishing in the near future?
It's completely relevant to that area. The cost of moving data, the egress fees of moving data in and out of the cloud are absolutely a major factor when trying to decide what the best storage is for a particular purpose. Then, of course, when you want to work on the data, ideally you have as much data available to hand as possible. And there's this kind of balance, if you like, here. There's this kind of fallacy of cloud is cheap. Well, if you're using a service, a bit like an Uber, if you're using a service temporarily, and then you're giving back that service for somebody else to use, then of course that is a different dynamic than if you have storage in the cloud that is 24/7 petabytes of storage, which then has a much higher cost. And on top of that, you're not sharing that resource, so to speak. And then on top of that, you've got to move the data where you want to be able to use it. So you have that kind of data gravity kind of factor going on of where is the best place to process the data? Is it better to process it in the cloud, or is it better to process it where the person is? These are all factors that you have to take into account with the cloud. And it would be a lie to say that the cloud is the be all and end all for every single workflow. Certainly not today. And the same goes for on-prem. There are horses for courses out there, and you have to use the right one.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about the workflows? How is cloud changing them, the storage workflows specifically?
Oh, brilliantly. I mean, you can take data and say into our platform. It can automatically move data up to the cloud for collaboration. It can maybe just bring back metadata. in either direction. It could be moving metadata and then sharing that with other people in other areas. Having the right data in the right time, the right place with the right metadata, being able to share that worldwide. That's amazing. You know, that's new. That's completely revolutionizing the way that people process and use their data. And for us, it's really important to make sure that our solution completely integrates and takes advantages of what different platforms do well.
Sure. And when it comes to adoption of object-based storage, Paul actually already aptly mentioned that that he doesn't know anymore many broadcasters who would not be adopting or cloud or object based storage. How do you see currently the adoption of object based storage, and what are those challenges that broadcasters and other end customers might face? And
yeah, no, absolutely. I think the word is out there now. It's no longer a secret that a great way to scale data is on object-based solutions. So I was in front of a panel in America and just quietly listening to what they had to say, and it was sports broadcasters in America, and the question put to them was LTO or cloud, and almost unanimously around that table they came back and said no, object storage. You know, this is the way to grow the archive. So it's no longer a secret. I think some people are still trying to work out the best way of integrating that and sharing the metadata and having that end-to-end experience. But the ability to grow that archive, that is absolutely needed. And I don't think there is a broadcaster out there who isn't aware of that, at least at some level.
How about you mentioned that you went to the US and also you mentioned sports broadcasters specifically in this context. Do you see that US would be more advanced in adoption of cloud and object-based storage than Europe?
I think we've seen maybe Amazon and the other cloud vendors have made a big early push in the USA, probably because of their location in relation to those broadcasters. So I think, yes, they did adopt some of the cloud-based workflows early, or earlier, should I say, than in Europe. But however, you know, people have the same needs the whole world over. Eventually, I think these things kind of work out and even out according to where they're best used. So yeah, I would say they're early, but not necessarily that far removed from the European needs and solutions being provided.
Okay. But then AI, it is naturally very interesting for storage segment. How do you see AI applications currently in store, and how is it impacting your business at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, AI is pretty exciting, isn't it? I mean, I spoke to the British film industry a few years ago, and I said to them, how much storage do you have? And I was expecting them to come back with, yeah, we have X petabytes or X, of storage. They said, oh, we have, I forget the exact number, but I believe it was 12 acres of storage. I was like, acres of storage? They said, oh yeah, no, we have that many warehouses, and all of our films are stacked up inside of those warehouses. And I just like, if you take that scenario to the modern scenario of you can have your whole media library in online solutions and be able to use AI algorithms to analyze them, find clips that are really important, whether they're clips of people or semantic type searches clips or clips of places or branding or whatever it may be that you're using your AI for to analyze that archive, then the world has changed. The world has changed from offline, really hard to find what you need to find, to you can have your entire archive searchable with the most modern, effective algorithms that are around. So within archive, within storage, for me, AI means let's be able to reuse that archive in ways we didn't even realize would be, available to us at all. And it's a great world. It's really exciting.
It's probably worthwhile making the point that there are so many film cans in libraries, and there aren't enough scanners in the world, or people. If they started today, they would never finish. So the preservation libraries have really, really big problems. The cost of migrating those libraries is huge. So there's sort of two threads of complexity here. One is libraries which have films and media on old videotape and stuff like that, which somehow needs to get migrated forward. And there is another class of library which is kind of happened about 10 years ago, which is large tape libraries with data tape cartridges in them, which have grown and grown and grown to the point that it's almost impossible to migrate stuff out, because you need enough drives to move lots and lots of petabytes out of them. And these drives wear out, and there's sort of all sorts of complexity because they were never designed to migrate away from. So there's a bunch of issues in the way of Jonathan's panacea, where all the world's libraries are stored on his storage, and invariably there's a big cost factor in there as well. So particularly around what I describe as the preservation libraries. The commercial libraries are okay because there's a commercial model to pay for it.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah. Then final question for Jonathan. What is coming next when it comes to content storage technology and also storage workflows? And how are you preparing for the change?
Yeah, so we already talked a little bit about what's happening right now. But if you take what's happening right now, you've got your on-premise storage, you've got your maybe storage on local PCs, maybe storage in cloud solutions, etc. I think what we're seeing now, and what we are certainly integrating towards, is how do you control all of that data? So how do you have a view as an organization of what you have, where it is, and what the cost of that is as well? So how do you search that? How do you make sure you get the preservation, the metadata, et cetera, et cetera? So those control systems that are needed today and will become increasingly needed as you go forwards, being able to monitor what's happening both within your local storage, your cloud storage, your dispersed storage, needs to revolutionize. It needs to revolutionize to manage data in what the world is becoming, which is basically software defined. You don't really care where your data is, but you do care that you can see where your data is and be able to control your costs around that data. So Object Matrix is certainly trying to play its part in that, to allow data analytics to be happening within our storage, to be presenting that information within our own tools, but making that information available within other tools, because we really see that the store world is going to become less about the what disk drive am I using, which is the old world, or what tape drive am I using, which is the old world, but it's more about how do I control and manage and get statistics out of what I'm doing.
Right. Yes, definitely agree. I have final question for both of you. Jonathan, you mentioned 8K already. So could both of you still give your insights about 8K and what you're expecting to see in this area, please?
Shall I go? I think.
Paul, please. Yeah.
Yeah. What I've seen of 8K, the pictures have been stunning. We go to each IBC and NAB, and the pictures get better, the displays get better. The slight struggle I have with it is it's almost too good for the normal domestic kind of experience. I can get home and, my family are actually watching something in HD, although there's a 4K TV, and not really noticing the difference. And I think the screen size that you need for 8K in a domestic environment is, to fully appreciate it, is pretty large. And I'm not sure it's going to fly for that reason. I love the technology behind it, though.
Yeah, I would very much concur with that. So I think 8K has some really interesting use cases. For instance, if you're 8K filming a sports event, then you can zoom in on different areas of that 8K in order to be able to have a very good experience from a very wide angle. So 8K within its kind of traditional usage, which is broadcast onto a television kind of usage, I completely agree with Paul. But I think there will be new use cases which increasingly come out of 8K. And those use cases will actually mean that things will be filmed in 8K, even if the final delivery is in a lower format. Yeah. So that's really interesting to watch and see what happens there. Of course, I would say that, and I would promote that, because again, we love it when more storage is happening and people need really modern, up-to-date systems in order to store and manage that data. So yes.
Yes, right. Thank you very much, both of you. Very interesting insights, and I'm sure that our members are excited to then get back to us and you for more details if needed.